Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2021-2022 Board of Aldermen Budget Deliberations. Today is Wednesday, April 21st, 2021, and we are continuing the department presentation portion of the 2021-2022 Aldermanic budget process. This meeting is being conducted remotely, and as we begin, I wanted to take an opportunity to highlight a few guidelines to ensure business runs efficiently and that all statutory and administrative rules are followed. In accordance with the Freedom of Information Act and Governor Lamont's executive orders, this meeting is being recorded and will be available on the City of Milford's website. If a member of the board would like to speak, please utilize the raise your hand feature via Zoom. And please do not speak over other individuals. And when you are not speaking, please keep your phones and computers on mute. After being recognized to speak, please state your name and address prior to making a statement. With that, will everyone please stand up wherever you are and join me as we pledge allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
United States of
to
America,
the republic for which it stands, one nation,
one nation, under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Secretary, will you please take the roll?
Alderman Beatty. Alderman Gainer. Here. Alderman Genentasio.
here,
Alderman Golden. Alderman Hardiman.
here,
Alderman Harlow.
Here.
Alderman Marlowe.
Here.
Alderman Parente. Alderman Frank Smith.
here,
Alderman Winthrop Smith.
Here.
Alderman Sutton. Alderman Tranquilli.
here,
Alderman Vitro.
Here.
Alderman Vitale.
here,
Alderman Willis.
here,
11 are present.
We have 11 members present. We do have a quorum. Is there a motion to come out of recess?
so move,
So moved.
Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to come out of recess. Madam Secretary, roll call, please.
Alderman Gainer.
Yes.
Alderman Genentasio.
Yes,
Alderman Hardiman.
yes,
Alderman Harlow.
Yes.
Alderman Marlowe.
Yes.
Alderman Frank Smith. Alderman Frank Smith, you're muted. Alderman Winthrop Smith.
Yes.
Alderman Tranquilli.
Yes.
Alderman Vitro.
Yes.
Alderman Vitale.
yes,
Alderman Willis.
Yes.
And I see Alderman Parente just signed on. So Alderman Parente, we're taking a vote to come out of recess.
I'm present, thanks.
Okay, and your vote to come out of recess?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Secretary, I'm sorry, I walked across the room to get my coffee. I'm yes for come out of recess.
Okay, all are in favor.
Motion passes unanimously. We are now out of recess. Thank you, Madam Secretary. This evening, we will be hearing from the Milford Board of Education. And the members are present are Susan Glennon, Anna Katea, Superintendent, Amy Fedigan, Jim Riccitelli, Pat Bradbury, Chris Brown, and Terry Devaney.
I'm here, Phil. It's Ellen.
Good evening, Ellen. Alderman Beatty. Is there any questions from the board to the Board of Education?
Mr.
We'll
Mr.
give them an
Vitro,
opportunity- We'll give them an opportunity for their presentation first.
thank you, Mr. Vitro. If you will, I have some opening remarks before Dr. Kutaya makes her presentation, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you so much. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to present to you tonight, and for myself offering some opening remarks before I turn the meeting over to Dr. Kutaya. I know many of you have heard it said before, but it's the truth. It's been a truly unprecedented year. 1 year ago, I never would have thought that we'd be back again on a Zoom presenting this coming budget, but here we are. The pandemic, the effects of which we anticipate will linger for many years as we work on educational and emotional recovery, has profoundly changed teaching and learning for the foreseeable future at least. Both good by way of some unprecedented silver linings and not so good has come from this. The district was well positioned to shift to a virtual learning platform fairly seamlessly last spring due to the investments made in recent years to technology and the beginning work of developing a model of high quality instruction and relationship building, all of which you supported in our recent budgets, and we are so grateful for that. Milford was in a far better place than other districts when this all began. And despite the pandemic, Milford Public Schools continues to receive accolades and recognition for its exceptional work. Students and staff members are to be commended for their remarkable resilience, creativity, and flexibility. That said, the board is acutely aware of the many challenges we face. This was a difficult budget for us to come to terms with because it temporarily sets aside some of the initiatives that we had discussed with you last year. Dr. Kutaya will explain the need to put some of those on hold in order to deal with the pandemic, but we still believe those initiatives are important to further elevate the district towards being the forward-thinking and progressive school system that our legwork in the superintendent search told us that our community desired. That belief is still very real and remains a firmly held conviction of the board. And while the immediate needs of the district may have changed, our responsibility to provide an appropriate education for all of our young people has not. It is important to underscore that this budget that we present to you tonight does not reflect continued pandemic-related expenses that may still be necessary going into next year. Dr. Kutaya will explain some of the specific challenges that are addressed in this budget, which always reflects the needs of the district and our continued hopes and dreams for Milford Public Schools. As always, the budget book contains many supporting documents, Dr. Kutaya's executive summary, my transmittal letter, and a list of frequently asked questions that might help provide some clarity to the numbers for you. And we encourage that you reach out to us should you have any remaining questions after tonight's conversation. So thank you again for having us present to you tonight. And Dr. Kutaya will now open her presentation on the operating budget for 21-22.
Thank you, Ms. Glennon. Thank you, Mr. Vitro and other members of the Board of Aldermen. It is always a pleasure to come before you to discuss the plans and the supports needed for the young people of Milford. I will just take a moment to underscore how incredibly proud I am of our students and staff and families of the Milford Public Schools over the last year. That I know the success of our school is because we have such an incredibly supportive community in Milford. And I know that exists through each one of you in your leadership. And as Ms. Glennon stated, we were poised, albeit no one ever really plans to be in a pandemic and schooling 5,400 students in a pandemic. But it's because of your support and leadership that we were very well poised with the resources at the time to shift immediately to meet student needs through relationships and academics. This continues the request this evening on how we can address the regular ongoing academic and social emotional needs of our young people, but even more so during a time where many refer to as educational recovery. I think I may have sat before you in a Zoom meeting last year and talked about, while we are likely focused on economic recovery, which was of great discussion at the time, post-pandemic, I alerted you and others in our community that we would need to also discuss educational recovery. So this evening, my presentation to you is a slightly bit different. It'll actually occur in 3 parts. I will present to you the Board of Ed's proposed budget and some nuances that we faced this year going into next year that we were not anticipating. I will, part 2, explain to you a little bit more about our special education costs, which are the primary drivers of our increased request before you. In the 3rd part, I will be talking to you about the federal funds that we have received and will receive in the future in order to address the pandemic, because I'm going to anticipate some questions from you regarding those federal funds. So I thought I would put some information to the presentation this evening to you around the do's and don'ts around the spending of that. Okay. So with your permission, Mr. Vitro, I'd like to share my screen so that I have some visual for everyone to follow along with. Okay. So when I share my screen, I can't see everybody. So if there is a need to interrupt me, if you could just unmute and say so, okay? Thank you. But I will take questions, or we will as a team take questions at the end. So the Board of Education proposed budget, I'd like to start, as you may remember, each year, reminding our community that we are steadfast in our commitment in making plans around 3 key priorities. When we write a strategic plan, when we develop professional learning plans, curriculum, budget priorities, they are founded in 3 key pieces, 3 legs of a stool. One is the vision of learner, which outlines what we want for every single student, PK through 12, as they move through our system, defines what we want them to be able to know and be able to do. Second, it is grounded in the relationships framework. As Ms. Glennon mentioned, we, the foundation of all of our work is based on relationships, on how students work with one another, how adults work with students, and how adults work with one another. And thirdly, we have a clearly defined model for high quality instruction, which primarily means we have defined what teaching should look like in every single one of our classrooms that will yield the greatest, most effective results. Based on those 3 areas, we developed budget priorities. Those budget priorities went to the board for consideration and were approved at a meeting on October 26, 2020. You will note that we are committed through these budget priorities to a core instructional program, a focus on wellness and development of students, ongoing capacity building through professional learning, effective class sizes, committed to physical learning spaces that are reflective of 21st century needs, and extending the learning beyond the school day through extracurricular activities and athletics. While I will not read all of the assumptions for you, they are found in the budget book that is before you. These assumptions were approved by the board in the same evening of the priorities. And they just outline some budgetary impacts that we are anticipating back in October. In the Board of Education budget presentation, I had many more slides with many more facts and details outlining our accomplishments. But in consideration of our time together this evening and the length of this presentation, I abbreviated those accomplishments. I always like to highlight the number of graduates that we were able to have crossed the stage. And if you recall, last year's graduation looked quite different than usual. We actually graduated 432 graduate students in 11 graduation ceremonies due to COVID. We're very proud of our students' accomplishments, and there's an outline there of some of those who graduated with honors. And then I will have to highlight that our response to closing our physical buildings starting March 16th, 2020 was nothing short of amazing. And I have to credit our incredible staff for being so quickly responsive. This slide mentions thousands of man hours, and tens of thousands and maybe hundreds of thousands of hours were spent to ensure that we were going to come back to physically safe buildings and consider all the academic, emotional, social emotional needs of our young people. We literally in 1 week moved an entire school district to a digital platform. When you add students and staff alike, in 7 short days, including the weekend, yes, we moved to a totally digital environment, 6,500 people. Huge kudos to the adults that made that happen, including our IT department. Our staff also made sure that 1.1 million square feet of building space were ready throughout the summer to open our doors in September for our young people. I would just like to underscore that it wasn't until the very end of June 29th, that we received our guidance on how we could open our schools. So in 8 short weeks, we created instructional models for bringing kids back, as well as preparing our physical spaces to ensure everyone was safe. And if you haven't heard the success story of our food service team, again, it's nothing short of a miracle of the number of meals that they have been able to provide. So our school district went, I'm so proud to say, well beyond the academic and social emotional needs of our families, but we made sure people were fed. So looking toward 21-22, and it's important to underscore what Ms. Glennon said also, that we did not intentionally bake into this budget a return based on what we think may happen in September due to the pandemic. A question you may have in your mind is, will we come back to a quote unquote normal physical building or a physical schedule or normal day? And I'm sorry to say that the answer is we're not sure. What is being predicted at this time is that we will still be coming back to a socially distanced classroom. Now, so much has changed in the last week alone, and what's anticipated to change in our state over the next 3 weeks. That statement that I just made about coming back socially distanced could easily be changed. But right now, the information that we as educators have is that we should prepare to come back in September to a socially distanced classroom, meaning there's a potential of having desks apart anywhere from 3 to 6 feet, still needing plexi in certain parts of the building, still needing to clean materials in between use. So I believe that the guidance on opening schools next year will come late again. So we don't have all the details. And so it is very predictive in nature at this time. So I reserve the right to be wrong when I say we're coming back socially distanced, because we certainly just don't have the appropriate guidance at this time. The proposed budget for next year represents a 2.255% increase. Total budget being $99,734,375. I will explain in greater detail throughout this presentation the breakdown of the 2.255. Please know that 0.12%, 1.2% of this budget represents an increase for general operations, and due to a very specific nature need in special education tuition and transportation, that 2.13% of this budget is related to special education accounts. We'll go into that a little bit more specifically. Here's a breakdown of the proposed budget by category. You will note that salaries and benefits are a majority of our proposed budget, as they always are year after year. That's very typical for an education budget, as you know. So close to 77% of our budget is related to the people who we hire and staff. Here's a breakdown by category and numbers more specifically, and this is where you will see the increases by category. I will call your attention to a couple things on this chart, that there are 5 categories that experience decreases, a percent and change, you'll note in the far right column, and in some cases, significant decreases. And that demonstrates the due diligence that we as a staff, as a leadership team, used to ensure that this increase was no more than what you see in front of you. It could have easily been much greater had we invested in other system improvements that we are going to delay yet another year. I'll talk about that more in a moment. The other item I want to draw your attention to is the tuition line. You'll notice that is going up by a little over 40%. That is a special education tuition line, which I'll talk a little bit more about. This is another way to look at our increases and decreases. It's the same chart, just in a visual. You will see the increases primarily occur in the area of tuition, salaries, transportation, and just a little bit of other support. I always like to share with our community where we found savings, where we cut back in order, because we do zero base budget. And so when we're building, we are looking for areas where we need to increase our investment and in areas where we don't need the same level of investment. So you'll see in these object codes in totality, we were able to find $1.3 million of savings, therefore offsetting the increase that is before you. And here's a history of our budget increases for the last good number of years, about 12 years. So I do want to talk a little bit about what improvements are new in this budget programmatically. What is a carryover from this year? And what have we put on hold? Now, last year we came to you with lots of program initiatives, lots of improvements that we were hoping and dreaming for our young people and our staff. And quite honestly, we had to put most all of those on hold. So we have examples from last year's budget presentation, which you approved, on expanding our high quality instruction professional learning. That was put on hold. Reinvesting in a new initiative or new focus on intentional play and executive functioning for pre-K and K. So there were some technology improvements were put on hold this year. Curriculum revision, some was reprioritized because of COVID. The purchasing of K-2 classroom libraries this year was put on hold. An addition of a community connection center was put on hold. I have a longer list, which I will not read all of, but there were items that we were going to initiate this year that we put on hold. So the next logical thing would be to put them into the 21-22 budget. But we have chosen to put those on hold in the proposed 21-22 budget because we felt that that would be not a responsible fiscal decision, because it would really increase our request of the city tremendously. But there are a couple of things that we felt strongly that we needed to move forward with that is represented in this budget. So for example, we started elementary world language program. Kindergarten, first and second grade have been rolled out for 2 years. We feel a responsibility to those second graders who are entering third to continue that course of study. So this proposed budget before you includes the addition of grade 3 world language instruction. Additionally, we feel very strongly that the Academy has asked for a passenger van to ensure that they have community-based experiences so that they are ready to enter the work world or their next step after graduating high school. Having a form of communication solely dedicated to the Academy will allow for more community and work-based experiences as related to their coursework to ensure the continued engagement of those young people and their success post-graduation. And the carryover system improvement And I'm sorry, last year I stated that next year when I'm before you, I will not have a stock picture, that I'll actually have a picture of Milford elementary kids in our science lab. But that's going to have to wait one more year because the rollout of elementary science labs were put on hold this year. But we feel very strongly that we cannot put off STEM education formally in this format for elementary kids one more year. So the purchasing of physical pieces to the science labs, the equipment, the curriculum, etc., is in this budget that is before you. So that concludes the portion about the operational proposed budget in front of you. I'd like to move into the special education explanation of the budget. So just as a highlight and a reminder, I'm sure everyone knows that we must adhere to federal law, also referred to as IDEA, and Connecticut law, as we design programs for students with disabilities. So we have a legal and an ethical and an educational and a social responsibility to educating all of our students in Milford. And sometimes that costs a little bit more. And that's what we find before us today in this budget. There were some students that require additional resources and programming in order for them to be successful in schooling. So the number of students with IEPs, individual education plans, or students with disabilities is on the rise. This is a nationwide increase, and we're seeing that happening in Connecticut, and we're seeing it happening in Milford. You will see here the percent of students with IEPs or students with disabilities in Milford, blue bar, versus Connecticut, red bar. Prevalency rate is close, but you'll see that there is a steady increase across the last few years. I will share with this board, as I have shared with our Board of Education, early research and evidence and predictions coming out of COVID is that this number is going to grossly and tremendously increase. That students with special needs, needing individual education plans, we're going to see this number increase tremendously. So part of our planning in the next section of the presentation, using some federal funds, will be to heavily front load SEL and mental health supports for kids in hopes to meet their needs prior to them needing IEPs. So you may have heard that Milford Public Schools has an incredible special education program. That rumor is true. We do a great job serving our young people here. In fact, it's our goal to keep young people, our students, in district. That's our #1 goal, because we want them to continue to be part of our learning community. In doing that, we actually, when we invest in through this our operational budget, when we invest in at-home programming, we actually save our community money when we can service our students in district. So this chart is an assimilation chart based on the greater number of students that we serve in district would actually yield a greater in-district program savings, which means we don't have the better programming and stronger programming we have in district, the fewer students we would have to move out of district for an added district placement, which would cost us exponentially more. So this assimilated chart actually shows the greater number of students we can serve in district, the greater cost savings that we can realize, which is what is already happening in Milford Public Schools. We already have great in-district programming, but there does come a time, as we have experienced, we experience every year, when some of our students' needs are much greater than our ability to serve them, and therefore they get an out-of-district placement. This chart summarizes for you, providing the increasing number of students with intense needs, meaning their needs are greater than what we can serve here in district, as they are increasing across the years. This data is only available to us by the state through 16-17 because they run a little behind on their stats. But you will see that our out of district placement is much lower than the state average. You may be asking, well, how many students do we have in out of placement? That number changes every year, depending on, of course, the developing needs of our young people who graduate, young people who move in, young people who are identified through Child Find early on, between the ages of 2 and 3. So the number over the last 5 years, I could provide you with a range, that the number of students in out district placement have ranged from 52 to 78. Now that number can fluctuate depending on, as I mentioned, the factors that I just mentioned. But we also revisit every child's IEP every year. So it's not that a child is outplaced and then we forget about them and they finish out their years at a district. Actually, each child's IEP is reviewed formally every year, and a reassessment, a full-blown reevaluation occurs every 3 years. So there are times when young people are outplaced at a district and they come back to us. So that's why there is so much fluctuation in these numbers, ranging 52 to 78 over the last 5 years. So just to summarize, and these numbers are in my letter in the budget book on the first page of my letter, bullet number 2. But the special education account increased by in total, all the accounts by 2.13%. And those accounts include tuition for special education public, tuition for special education non-public, special education transportation. So those three accounts, 4 accounts, totaled increases of a 2.13% of the total increase of this budget. That concludes the second part of my presentation this evening. I'd like to now focus on the funds that we have received from the federal government to respond to the pandemic crisis. And you may have heard of these 3 phrases and letters, so I'm going to present them all in the event that you heard of the CRF or CARES or ESSER. And every time I talk to different people, it seems like people use those interchangeably. So let me rewind for you a little bit, that in immediate response to the coronavirus, we received $957,310 in total. All of those funds have already been expended because they were received early on in the pandemic, and we had to immediately respond to the needs that the pandemic brought to us that we were not prepared for financially. There is a breakdown of how the CRF funds were spent on this slide. So you'll notice that we had a large investment in non-personnel related, so cleaning, PPEs, health safety procedures, stickers for hallways, etc. We had to buy many things in the non-personnel. And I know Mr. Riccicelli is with us this evening. He could give us a much more detailed breakdown of how the CRF funds were spent. The second pot of money that we received was referred to as CARES or ESSER 1 in the total amount of $456,031. These funds have already been expended as well, and we are allowed to charge backward to this fund all expenses related to the pandemic starting March 13th, 2020. So I'm going to pause here and note that these first 2 sources of money were intended for how to respond, were intended to use for COVID response efforts in the moment, at the time, in order to keep us safe and open school doors. And therefore, that's why those monies have already been expended. Looking forward now, there are 2 more pots of money coming our way. We refer to this as ESSER 2, and we are receiving, have not officially, applications are due by next week, $2,347,456. This ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, the expending of these monies are much more prescriptive than the first 2 pots of money. The federal government and the State Department of Education is giving some guidance around this, are identifying 4 pots, 4 categories upon which these monies must be spent. And those 4 categories are before you on this slide. Academic category, a family community connections category, a social emotional category, and then more of a remote learning, technology, professional learning around that category. Let me share with you a couple of thoughts, because I know this question will come up this evening. And I'm just reviewing the definition. I'm sure you all understand the difference between supplement and supplant. But these are important when we're talking about grants. To supplement means to build up or add to supplant means to replace or take the place of. Federal law prohibits recipients of federal funds from replacing state, local, or agency funds with federal funds. ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, and the intention of those 2 funds are to supplement what is already happening in school districts, understanding that the SEL and academic demands for recovery are going to be exponentially greater than we would have ever anticipated for a regular school year. There's also something else to keep in mind, and that is a maintenance of effort. I will let you read this slide, but primarily in summary, federal funds cannot replace or reduce local or state funds used in past years to educate students, because there's a potential consequence. It could jeopardize the receiving of other federal funds, for example, like IDEA, the special education funding we receive. So in summary, ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 must really be used for new purposes and programming, particularly in response to the pandemic. The guidance we have received from the feds and the state have been so specific that I actually included the specificity of guidance on how to use ESSER 2 and 3 funds in the next couple of slides for you. You will note that they give lots of specific examples in the areas of learning loss, high quality assessments, evidence-based activities. It just highlighted some of this wording in bold because it's a lot to read. The tracking of student attendance and engagement, tracking of progress, getting additional resources, addressing the unique needs of special populations, spending money on procedures and systems to improve our preparedness and responsiveness for the next pandemic, training and professional learning, sanitizing, cleaning, coordinating activities for long-term closures in the event that this was to happen again, and we don't know what next year will look like. The money is to be used for educational technologies, for mental health services and supports, which we're identifying to be great for next year. We are planning to provide summer learning and after-school programming. We've already started a little bit of that, and our plans for summer learning will be launched here in the next week or 2. School facility repairs and improvements that are specific to reducing the risk of virus transmission, addressing indoor air quality, and other activities that help us operate schools in post-pandemic. So you'll see that there's a high level of specificity around how to spend ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. And the question you may be asking is, what's the anticipated American Rescue Plan or ESSER 3 amount coming to Milford Public Schools? And the anticipated amount is $5,830,453. And those monies, and like ESSER 2, I'm sorry, I failed to mention, we have until September 30th, 2023 to spend ESSER 2. So we have to write a multi-year plan on how to spend that money. The anticipated expiration of ESSER 3 is the year 2023, but I understand there is potential legislation being considered to extend it to 2024. And again, I'll summarize that all of our plans, including the expenditures of the federal monies that we're receiving, will be grounded in what we steadfastly believe will bring greater improvement to Milford Public Schools, and that is a focus on the vision of the learner, relationships, and the model for high quality instruction. Mr. Vitro, that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy for me and my team to take questions from you at this time.
Well, I want to thank you, Dr. Kataya, for that great presentation. I know it took a while to get that all together. Before I turn it over to board's questions, I just have a broad question to ask you. How come the Milford schools system, the school are still on a half-day session when most of the surrounding towns are in full session? Why are we still in a half-day session?
Well, I'm happy to go into great detail on that. I'm not sure how much time we have this evening, but technically we're not on a half day. We are on a early dismissal. We're in for 5 hours rather than 6 hours and 40 minutes. And our intention was to consider coming back to full-time schedule, but we had a significant spike in our Milford positivity rates. And so when we consult and work with the health department, we're all in agreement that at this time was not the right time to increase our in-person learning hours. So we are on 5-hour days, 5 days a week at this time.
And that's parallel with all our surrounding towns?
No, Mr. Vitro, my understanding is that about 50% of Connecticut is back full-time and about 50% is not. So I'm not sure. And everyone likes to compare us to Orange. So I guess this is a great opportunity for me to speak as to what Orange is doing and what we're not doing. Orange is separating their students by 3 feet. So their desks are not 6 feet apart like Milford Public Schools is. Theirs are 3. And there are 2 major impacts that has on a schedule and how you run a school. So one, we went to 6 feet, and that meant that we had many more physical classrooms to use. And instead of coming to the Board of Ed or the city for more money to hire teachers, we redeployed about 24 of our elementary teachers alone. I'll use that as an example, to teach cohorts of children. Because when you separate kids by 6 feet, you can fit fewer students in a classroom. So we can only fit about 16 kids in a room. So we needed many more teachers in other classrooms to teach. So that then removed out of non-classroom teachers to help with lunch coverage. And so teachers are covering lunch and not getting preparation periods during the school day, because we can't get lunch aides to come and cover lunch. And our non-classroom teachers have been redeployed to teach kids. So teachers are taking their lunch and their prep after school hours when kids leave after being in school for 5 hours. That scenario does not exist in Orange. And I think Orange only has a handful of schools, and we're dealing with 14 campuses and 5,400 kids and 1,400 employees. So the nuances of our 6 feet socially distanced, the redeployment of staff is much more complex than a smaller school district like Orange. And Mr. Vitro, I'm happy to talk to you or any other Board of Aldermen more in depth, because there are also 5 factors that I consider that I've outlined that I can go into now, but that'll take up more time if you want. And then I could go through our health metrics and the number of people that have been out sick with COVID, and our quarantine practices are different than Orange because they're 3 feet, we're 6 feet. We go through close contact tracing where they send whole classrooms home. So they may be in full time, but if there's a positive case in a classroom, the whole class gets quarantined, where we don't do that. We only quarantine because we're 6 feet on close contact. So I'm sorry, I feel like I'm going on and on about that, but there are so many nuances. I'm happy to talk to you about it on the phone if you'd like.
Thank you for that. I'll open up the questions for the rest of the board. Anyone have any questions for the school staff? Alderman Vitale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Thank you, Dr. Kataya, for the excellent presentation. And
Thank you.
please pass on my congratulations to all of the teachers, because I know it's a difficult situation to get through and to plan, and you guys at central office are amazing at the point where we're at in Milford. I think comparing Orange or Stratford or Trumbull, whatever, to our situation where we are distancing ourselves at 6 feet. And that's a question, because if you have, I saw in the enrollment statistics that there are some classes of 10, and then there are some classes of 17. It goes across the gamut. But how then, when you have a class of whatever number staying 6 feet apart, how do you deal with that? You put them in another classroom? How do you deal with that? And I have a follow-up question.
I think I know what you're asking, so if I'm not answering what you're asking, stop me, okay?
Okay.
So if there was a class of 23 students in a fourth grade room last year, for this year, so we planned based on our guidelines of 20 students in K2 and 23 in 3-5. What we cannot fit 23 kids in a typical elementary classroom with 6 feet apart.
Right.
What we found was anywhere from 16 was most, and in some cases 18, if we really pushed it. So then we took those other 7 kids, and this is before kids came to school, so we had an opportunity to reshuffle the decks. So if in that fourth grade there were 2 sections of 23, Mr. Vitale, now there would be 3 sections of fourth graders. Now you can imagine, Mr. Vitale, we did not budget for 3 sections in fourth grade. So we had to, in the end, across 8 elementary schools, I think the number is 24, but it could be 22. There were 24 non-classroom teachers that we redeployed so that we would not exceed the 6 feet apart requirement. Did I answer the question or no?
Yeah, it does. And so basically we're increasing the number of teachers in that building. So when you get to the point where you may not have space to do that, because I know that the footprint of many of the schools years ago, when we had 700 kids in the building and we're at 203 at this particular point in some buildings, we changed the footprint because of what the fad at the time, whether it was a writing center, whether it was a publishing center, and we took those rooms and divided them into a variety of space for PT, all of the ancillary kinds of things. So it's difficult today. So I know it's difficult. So when you don't have the space in the building to do that, what is the answer to that? In other words, if you had that fourth grade that you needed to now split into 2, and you used every room in that building, what is your option to get, as we used to do, you can't fix it by putting a resource teacher, or not a resource teacher, but an aide into that building, because it's no longer numbers, it's space and distancing.
So let me just add to your thinking a little bit as well. We were also required by the state to find a seclusion room where any potential students or staff that were positive would have to be quarantined immediately. And there were some specific physical space requirements on the seclusion room. So that adds to the problem. And then second, when you started off by thanking the staff, we can't thank Milford Public School staff enough. We can't say it enough. Because last summer, Mr. Vitale, we brought staff in under very scary times. Because if you remember last July and August, we didn't know what we were coming back to. So under very scary, strict protocols, staff came back, were health screened, were only allowed in their room for 1 day. And in 1 day that they had to empty out their rooms. Because you'll know very specifically, Mr. Vitale, because your previous employment, classrooms are lined with stuff. library books, manipulatives, bean chairs, rugs. In one day, we had to remove all that. And in most cases, they ended up in trailers, but many other cases, they also ended up in the multi-purpose room. So we just basically removed the multi-purpose room for use. So to answer your question, we really maxed out every space in every building. So you'll see, at Law, the cafeteria has been transformed into 2 classrooms. The library has been transformed into 3 classrooms. We've lost common spaces. There are some elementary libraries that are classrooms. So we've lost some common spaces. So I'm thankful we had a little elbow room because we would have never been able to make it through this pandemic.
So what you're saying is that the space is adequate at this particular point in time, and you're able to handle it the best you can. If we can just go back to IEPs and special education, and you indicated the fact that IEPs have risen like 15%. And pretty soon, and I don't know if it's going to get to that, but every kid would have an IEP, and then we'd really be in hot water. But the point would be is 8.3 are out of district. Can you give us an average cost of what that individual is costing the city or Board of Education for outplacement?
So average cost is tricky because it really depends on the significant need of a child. Mr. Brown is with us, our director of PPS, and I'm going to ask him to jump in, but it really is dependent on the child. I'm hoping his answer supports mine, but he'll give you more detail.
On average, the average cost is around between $75,000 and $80,000 for tuition for a student in out-of-district placement. The range, though, goes from around $60,000 to well over $200,000, depending on the needs of a student. So it's a broad range. One of the things to be aware of is as we have developed in-district programs to meet the needs of a large number of our students, what happens is the students whose needs we can't meet are more significant and more intense than they had been in past years before we had ample in-district programs. So the average cost of a student who's outplaced this year is higher than the average cost of a student who was in an out-of-district placement 5 years ago.
Mr. Brown, and I'm aware of that. Well over $200,000 can be expended for some instances of individuals. Now, the question would be, if that child had an outplacement of over $200,000 for a year and maybe years, is it not more beneficial to have an in-house classroom to accommodate that individual?
If we could, we would figure out a way to do that. But typically, these students, and in the case in Milford currently, there is not a possibility for the staff of Milford Public School to be able to create the programs that these children need. I can't get into the details of what those needs are because it's such a small number. We might be able to identify the child who we'd be discussing, but the specific needs that sometimes in these cases move towards significant medical needs could not be met by the physical plant of one of our school buildings.
And I understand that. That was always the question as to if we're spending $225,000 on one child, wouldn't it be worth it to hire an individual and to support his needs or their needs? My other question, if I could follow up on the funds from the federal government, maybe either Dr. Katai or Jimmy or somebody can answer these. You mentioned a couple of programs, CRF, CARES, ESSER2, and the American Rescue Act. Where, if in any, do the PPPs and the PPE fit into that? Are those separate monies coming in also?
If it's okay, I'll jump in. Alderman Vitale, the PPE masks, shields, things like that, the plexiglass shields that virtually are in every classroom now, in every office. um, things like hand sanitizer, all those things that you would consider to be personal protective equipment in some way, shape, or form. That's what the money from the CRF, Coronavirus Relief Fund, and the ESSER 1 monies were used for. Those monies were the immediate needs of the school district to keep things healthy, to keep things safe, and to bring back students as safely as possible. It paid for things like custodial overtime. It paid for things like the bus monitors that were required on the elementary school buses, things like that. Anything that we needed to meet the immediate needs of the response to the pandemic, we could use those CRF and ESSER 1 funds for.
Okay, and yeah, I was wondering where that fit in. And what about PPPs with the payroll piece too? Is that part of the CRF and the CARES?
No,
Like
that didn't apply to us because
Oh, okay.
under the governor's executive order, we had to pay all of our employees.
Oh, out of what we had done. I mean, if I continue, can I continue, Mr. Chair, with my questions, or do you want me to break at this point?
Well, I'd like to have someone else have a chance. As you can always get back to you, Alderman Vitale. But
Okay, so I figured let me, get all these out. These might be some questions that other people have also, but okay. I'll come back to some questions.
Thank you. Alderman Wynn Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you to Dr. Kataya, I'd just like to commend you on your hard work on the budget, everyone on the Board of Education for their work on the budget, for that wonderful presentation that you just gave. I particularly like the number of graduates and their accolades that you put up there. That was wonderful to see. So I just have a few questions. I'll try to keep it short. My first question, it seems as though one of the issues that you and people at the Board of Education had were the distancing. So the distancing caused a whole number of different complications, it sounds like. And that was the 6 feet, and you just went through a whole bunch of different items that were problematic because of that. And I know that the CDC came out with their K through 12 recommendation as to 3 feet is now acceptable for students. And I was wondering if the Milford schools were planning on implementing 3 feet or otherwise. If you had discussed it, and if you think it would remedy some of the problems that the school system and that the classrooms were facing.
Thank you, Alderman Smith, and I appreciate those kind words. And the question about 3 to 6 feet, I think has been on my mind since last August. And knowing that 3 would be easier operationally, but 3 is not necessarily better health-wise. And I understand CDC came out with that verbiage. And I don't do anything without the partnership of the Milford Health Department. And I will take this opportunity to thank publicly everyone at the Milford Health Department, because they have been great partners throughout all of this. With that said, we have also been very like-minded. And I don't claim to be a doctor of medicine. I'm a doctor of education. And there are people that are much more researched and professional and expertise in that. So when we consult with the health department, we come out of that room, out of that dialogue on the same page. So at the time that the CDC came out with 3 feet, actually there's some language, if I understand it correctly, from the health department that 3 feet is recommended under certain circumstances. And since we are still in the red zone on our positivity rate, that 6 feet is really recommended in the area that the place we're in. Now, I could have that wrong, but that's my understanding. So we would not move to 3 feet now because it would cause so much disruption for our young people. Because now if a child has Dr. Fedigan, let's say for a classroom teacher, and I went from 3 sections to 2, whose child should I move now to the other two? So we would not be moving 2-3 feet now, but Ms. Alderman Smith, I think that is the big question to be answered in planning for September. And I think on April 21st, it's just way too early to know if we're going to be 3 feet or 6 feet or 0 feet. That may even be a possibility. I don't know. 3 feet would certainly be easier to plan for. There would be different resources needed to plan for 3 feet, but we simply don't know. But it is on the table. Health Department and I have talked about it, and it is part of our planning likely over the summer.
Okay, I appreciate that response. Thank you for that. But my second question is with respect to the IEPs. Is there ever, and you know, those are necessary, and there's sometimes a tremendous amount of money spent on IEPs, whether they're you know, in district or out. Is there ever a point where a student needs an IED or an IEP, I'm sorry, and they no longer need that? They get to a point where they no longer need an IEP moving forward? Or is it that they get one and they'll always need one until a certain point?
There are instances where students meet their goals and no longer need the supports through an IEP. I am not sure that that would be the case with our out-of-district students. Mr. Brown, am I too far off of that?
No, but one of the things that we do focus on is if a student is in an out-of-district placement with an IEP, we do work towards bringing that student back to one of our in-district programs. So the student would continue to have an IEP, but we could work with that out-of-district placement to help the student make enough progress so that their needs can be met with one of our in-school district programs. So that would be a good cost savings for us. More importantly, it allows the student to participate in school with his or her neighbors, with his or her siblings, and to be a full part of our Milford community and not have to ride on a van or a bus for a length of time to be educated with students who are part of other communities. So that's always our goal, to work to bring students back. We have successfully brought a few students back into the district during this current school year, and we do have plans. We are currently planning to bring a few more students back for the start of next school year. And that's a months-long process. So we've begun that now to prepare students to return in September.
Thank you for that, Mr. Brown. And then through you, Mr. Chairman, just my last question before I turn it over to other aldermen. The pandemic relief, the funds, the federal funds we're receiving, particularly the ESSER funds, ESSER 1, 2, and 3. You talked briefly about the fact that that's going to take significant long-term planning, long-term education planning for those funds, so that we can show where we're using it for, and we have a particular timeline in which to use it. And as you probably remember, I talked when we last met about budgeting discussions, I had touched on a new long-range plan. And I think with these new funds coming in, I think it would be particularly important to have that new long-range plan. And so my question is, have you discussed that with the board? Have you discussed a plan for that new long-range plan? Because I think that would be particularly important, especially if we're going to be already long-term planning for these ESSER funds. Have you discussed that?
Thank you, Alderman Smith. Actually, the board and I are currently engaged in the redevelopment of 5-year goals for the district. And we are going through the process through workshops, hoping to be completed by July 1st. A new development of commitments, district commitments, and district goals and measures of success. Those are primarily oriented around commitments such as equity, academic rigor, professional learning, social emotional support, mental health. So our long-term planning right now is occurring around key commitments and pillars that would inform the expenditure of these funds, actually. So it is good timing and goes hand in glove on how those two federal fund grants will be spent.
I appreciate that response. And through you, Mr. Chairman. So just so I'm clear, I know that the board is operating currently under a current long-range plan that was done a while ago. So are you suggesting that you're working on a new long-range plan, or was your response particularly to something other than that?
Can you be more specific on a long-range plan? I'm not sure what you're meaning by that. Do you mean our 5-year goals for the district?
Yeah. So when we had discussed this last year, it was my understanding that there was a long-range plan committee that had met, convened, and then created a plan for the Milford educational system, and that the Board of Education and in tandem with the city was working towards the goals that were created in that plan. And I think Mr. Riccitelli had mentioned that they are working pursuant to that long-range plan when we had met in person at the Board of Aldermen meeting. So to that end, I'm discussing that in particular. So that long-range plan, in which a long-range plan committee had met, convened, and created one, I'm wondering if that is happening again for a new one.
Are
I
you
can
referring
jump
to a
in.
facilities long-range plan?
And maybe Mr. Riccitelli can touch on this, but when we discussed this at the last meeting, we discussed the particular plan that the Board of Education is working with the city on, that had been created for this specific purpose.
If I could jump in on that, the long-range planning committee from the about 7 years ago, this was now. Yes, we did. We developed the plan that we developed included things like, to go back in my memory, we went back to the K-5 elementary system. We redistricted to rebalance the schools and allow that to happen. We directed administration to decentralize preschool, which is something that's going on now. We directed them to develop a number of career pathways for the 6-12 continuum and enhanced programming for elementary school, which included the science labs and the science education, world language, and some early childhood issues. So those are the things that now are beginning to come to fruition. And at this point, we are focused on the pandemic and getting through the next few years. We have not discussed putting in place a new long-range planning committee at this point for what you're speaking of. I think our needs at this point are a little bit too great for that right now. We're focused on the educational recovery that will need to take place because of this pandemic.
Of course. And thank you for that. And that's what I was asking. I guess I wasn't clear. I thought we were clear on the conversation that we had the last time when we spoke about this. So I guess I'll just be sure to touch on that more frequently so that there is clarity. Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Alderman Harlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Dr. Kataya, to mirror or to duplicate my fellow aldermen's comments, huge thank you to you, to the Board of Education, to the 1,400 employees working every minute, every day, getting us through. Who knew last year this time when we sat and talked about budgets that this would go along for a whole year and then some. So again, thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts. Tremendous job, and you continue to do so. That being said, very simple question that I do have regarding Alderman Vitale and Chairman Vitro's questions. 3-foot rule, full day. Is there a correlation between the two? When do you see possibly the city going back to a more traditional full day schedule for the students?
Alderman Harlow, I'm in regular communication with the health department. We just got back from spring break, and the intention was to come back right after spring break to a full day schedule. But after reviewing the health metrics and knowing that we had over 200 staff members alone traveling, and many more than that families traveling, the health metrics didn't warrant an increase in in-person. So we have dialogue going on this week about what the potential next steps will be. So I can't answer that question this evening. I just wonder if I need to clarify something, because Alderman Harley, you brought up the 3 feet. So the 3 feet is not necessarily a budgetary impact. The 3 feet, because we made it work this year with staffing, is much more an impact on the amount of time teachers are with kids, and there aren't enough adults to provide relief for the obligated times we have to provide them with preparation and lunch periods. So we made the 6 feet work by redeploying resources this year. If the 6 feet is in place next year, we will have to determine how to cover those cohorts next year. So I don't want to cause any confusion in this meeting that the 3 feet has something to do with our budget. It's primarily on how we've staffed our building and how we cover lunches. And many of our lunch aides were of the 60+ age and of our highest risk population. So those lunch aides chose not to work this year. So that most of the year, our schedule was determined by human resources, which meant the availability of staff. So the beginning of the year, we saw many more adults testing positive and requiring quarantine. We got to the point in November, December that we weren't able to cover our classes with adult bodies. And that's why our middle and high schools went remote, if you'll remember, in the winter. And then everybody came in mid-January back to in person. And then in March, we added Wednesday, and we're on the watch for a full day. I also wanted to remind you, or just share with you if you don't know, we're one of the few school districts in the state of Connecticut that started the school year with 100% of students back in school. So while we're sitting here in April with not a full day, our Milford Public Schools kids have had access to in-person learning much more, if you want to compare us to the rest of the state, because we didn't do 50% of kids on A day and B day and everybody home on Wednesday. We invited 100% of our kids back on day 1, and not many school districts did that. And we were able to pull that off because we redeployed resources. We did not ask for additional. We took what we had, we put initiatives on hold, and we were incredibly fiscally conservative to the point where we went on a budget freeze. So there's a lot of talk tonight about why aren't we full-time, but I don't want us to forget that we've been more in person all year than any other school district, I would say, because we invited 100% of kids day 1. And that's a big difference when it comes to schooling. So I meet with parents. I have a parent advisory group. I meet with the health department regularly, and I have a leadership team where we meet twice a week to revisit all of these scenarios. Add Wednesday, don't add Wednesday. Extend the school day, don't extend the school day. So I assure you, we take this very seriously.
Thank you. It just, as to your point before about the 3 feet and the resources, that's how I viewed your statements earlier. Seeing if in fact that was a long-term solution, it would obviously be a requirement to increase resources to pay for that. So my question was based on that.
Okay, great. I'm glad. I hope I clarified. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Alderman Parente.
Hi, good evening. Through you, Chairman, to Dr. Kataya. I wanted to congratulate you. I don't know if everyone here knows that you received the Outstanding Superintendent Award from the Connecticut PTA. Parents Association. So that was really a point of pride for us in Milford.
Thank you, Alderman Valenti.
Yeah, and I have one question that I'm going to get to, but I wanted to first just really thank you for the commitment to social equity and racial equity that you put in your first comments in the budget. And I think that's such an important thing, especially in the time we're in. So to see that commitment to all of our students to make our whole student population aware of those differences that need to be addressed and have them have a different outlook on the world than we might have had kind of growing up. I think that's fantastic. One thing I was wondering about is how many kids may have dropped off from schooling altogether during this period of time, and how can that be remedied? And what have you heard from parents in terms of what their needs are with the shorter time that the kids have been in school? And are there ways to address that through some of the monies coming in? So that would be a question. And then also seeing that you have, I think, Mr. Brown here, who's a school psychologist. I think for me, my biggest concern is that the kids are going to have issues that are going to last beyond the next few years where the money is going to be available. So I'm sure you're going to be building robust systems to deal with that, but on the physical level, the emotional, social, emotional learning level, I know my daughter's ophthalmologist said they're seeing a huge spike of kids having eye problems from having their phones around much more now. So if you could comment on that in any way, but I support your budget, and I thank you for your forward looking and your commitment to our kids and your progressive vision for Milford. I think my daughter is going to be a step above the rest coming from here. So thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Parenti, for those kind words and recognizing the importance of our equity work in Milford Public Schools. It is a priority, and we are fast tracking that, although it is a long-term investment. So you'll be hearing about equity work in Milford Public Schools for a long time. It's not a quick fix. As far as engagement, we have been really intentional about keeping an eye on engagement. That's what we are referring to actually in your question. So instead of referring to as a drop-off, we are trying to ensure that there is engagement by every child at every level. And that's not just checking into the Google Meet and then shutting off your video. That also includes a participation aspect of engagement. So early on in the school year, we knew we needed to get ahead of that. So we established school-based and district-based committees to keep an eye on student engagement. And that created a circle of support for young people who were struggling with that. So we had support staff, potentially like a school psychologist, an administrator, teachers, to keep an eye on individual kids. So this wasn't just about a statistic. Let's keep participation at 95% and above. If there was even a single kid, they had our attention. In addition to that, we retooled some of the use of our SROs to keep an eye on engagement as well, and to be part of outreach in a very healthy way. And then at the district level, we have an individual who at one time was primarily only focused on residency and tardy and truancy, but we retooled that position yet again to have that individual help with engagement, to do home visits in a socially distanced, safe way, of course, for young people who may have been not as present, if you will. So we are proud of being way ahead of that. Before it became a problem, we put a structure in place to be responsive at the school level and district level and at the home level as well. The second part of your question, actually, I mentioned that our application is due next week on ESSER 2. I don't know the percentage of that $2+ million, but most of that is going to be focused on SEL. Some of it is around academic recovery, but most of that will be focused on the social emotional learning needs of young people. Some of it is specifically targeted for elementary and middle. So we will, and we are and will continue to prioritize. My sense is even with ESSER 3, SEL will be a big spotlight, a big focus of those monies. We anticipate that will be the greatest area of recovery for our young people. While moms and dads are worried about reading and writing and math, and many are also in their social emotional, but I think as a school system, we'll be highly focused on SEL. Does that answer your question, Alderman Parenti?
It does, thank you. I
Thank
think
you.
that, I just think that the students, it's organic. We don't know what the long-term issues are going to be, and to try to interrupt them as we go, I think is really something that is urgent to do. So I thank you for your commitment to that.
Alderman.
Yes, thank you. And for the sake of time, I'll be very brief, but thank you to the faculty, the staff, all the employees, the relationship of the Board of Ed and the central office to the school, and all the progress. We are very proud. I have a comment and a clarification. The comment is to follow up with Alderman Smith. I'm thinking that maybe it's a matter of vernacular. I know you internalize a vision. I hear Ms. Glennon say the same thing, that you talk about STEM, you know what you're talking about and how you're moving there. But I'm thinking, and I thought that the conversation last year at budget time was around a strategic plan for the school so that it was operationalized somehow. So with these large budgets, we would all be on the same page. Not that you don't have a mission or a vision, but something different than a facilities plan or structural plan. That's the way, a roadmap, if you will. Maybe that would help us to be in partnership with you for the long-term budget to meet those goals. And then secondly, when you talked about, this is the question, when you talked about special ed, and that was the driver for the cost, a lot of the 2% cost, you mentioned there's a pie chart in your presentation, transportation and tuition, they went up, and that's special ed drivers. What were the other two categories? There were 4. So there were increases in transportation and tuition, specifically connected to special ed needs. And then the other 2, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I
No,
missed
I'm just looking at my letter on my other screen.
I don't have it in my hand, or I'd answer my.
Alderman Beatty, I will give you some specifics. So the tuition for special education went up by $225,562. Tuition for special K, and that was public. Then there's a non-public tuition that went up by $758,313. And then special education transportation went up by $93,361. Those were the 3, totaling an increase of special ed accounts of $2,077,236.
Okay, thank you. And then lastly, in your presentation, you said the ESSER monies, and you put the bullets. That was very informative about what they're focusing on. One is the students who are disengaged. So your last little summary, when you said that because of our full day, no, because of 100% of our students are engaged this year through pandemic, we have much less of a concern about disengagement than many other comparable school districts.
Well, we
That's-
invited 100% of our students back.
Yeah, that's pretty. Mhm.
And where some districts were inviting 50% for only 2 days and then 2 other days. Our engagement has been a little bit of a roller coaster depending on the season of the year. And depending on what level of in-person and distance learning we've had. And it depends on the level you're in. So some of our high schoolers become less engaged during a regular school year in the spring. Imagine what it looks like this year. So we do have different levels of engagement at different levels, elementary, middle, and high school. And thank you for that clarification on strategic plan. We are working on a quote unquote strategic plan, which will follow our commitments and goals.
Thank you.
Alderman Frank Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Kataya, for the very well prepared presentation in these unique times. I'd like to commend you and all of the administration and everyone in the school district for what they've been able to accomplish comparatively and solely in terms of what the Milford school system offers to its students and to the families. And we all have learned now, I think, how integral education is and how important in-person learning is to our society, not just a particular school district, but in terms of how it affects everything throughout our life, ability to go to work, the effect on the economy, which informs why some in government have been pushing to have reopening of the school. And I think you and your staff have done a masterful job in coordinating that with different realities being presented all the time, new mandates coming down from the state, changes when we've had surges in the epidemic. It is difficult to be this agile and to do what we need to do in the midst of a pestilence, but the Milford public schools, I think, have been extraordinary in what we've done. And I'd also like to echo Alderman Parente's recognizing your citation, Dr. Kataya, and congratulations to you on that. I have lately been talking to a lot of parents and a lot of teachers, a lot of Milford public school teachers in particular. And what I'm about to say is not necessarily reflective exclusively of Milford public schools, but you had mentioned before that Milford was unique in going to more in-person learning than the other districts when we began this school year. And with that comes the obvious response to that. We're going to do in-person learning with social distancing and all the medical and sanitary requirements that go with that, in addition to remote learning. In the beginning, it was a lot of remote learning, but as we've begun to emerge from that, we're having where teachers are now expected not just to teach from their computer, their laptop, they're expected to be in school, dealing with or managing a classroom of students while also trying to split their time up by doing the remote learning where it is required or it's necessary for a variety of reasons. This hybrid system has put an enormous strain on teachers. I think it might be, at least in my limited view, but also from other school districts, it's probably the biggest challenge they've faced. I know that most of these teachers, some of them are in my family. My mom was a Milford public school teacher, and nobody is as dedicated to their profession as teachers, and the welfare and advancement of their students is important to them. And it's frustrating when they can't achieve some of these things. Nobody had anticipated this. This has never happened in any of our lifetimes. But right now, I'm understanding this dual teaching is just an unsustainable. I know myself from trying to run simultaneous Zoom meetings with my work and my elective responsibilities. It's impossible to coordinate sometimes to monitor, let alone be engaged in two separate activities in virtual world, and to get anything out of either one of them. Most of the time, you're probably better off not doing it at all. The remote learning has been suffering abuses sometimes by the parents that try to use it as kind of a boutique arrangement where they're able to dial in their kids at one point or another and then kind of get you with little notification, cancel and work things around, not at the teacher's convenience, but at their own. Remote learners tend to have lower attendance and participation rate. Their disproportionate level of attention to stay on task and be engaged is lessened, obviously, because they're not in the room. And that often comes at the expense of the other students. It's disruptive, lost learning time for both in-person and remote students as classroom instruction stops to handle all these countless technical issues using Zoom and the different types of links. So there's a technical and just a natural disruption by trying to basically juggle both sides. And it's inequitable because at least when you're in school, you're kind of working from the same presence in that room. And when you have people that are working remotely, there are some children, some families that don't have the resources that others do. Teaching can be fractured, tends to, when you try to focus on in-person and remote learners simultaneously. And as a result, as I said before, neither receive the support or that they need or deserve. We're all hoping to get back to the normal school life. But frankly, I don't see the remote learning is going to be supplanted when we begin again in September. I think this is a reality we're dealing with. You had mentioned, Dr. Kataya, in the ESSER 2 program, there are like 5 bullet points of focus: academic, family, social, and emotional learning, and also remote. The teachers I've talked to said they just can't sustain this. They don't feel that any of this, they're not doing their job, and it's a very emotional and challenging proposition for them. With the federal funding and so forth, do you have a conception of remote learning in this new kind of hybrid era, where maybe there could be a remote learning center that would be distinct and separate from the in-house activity of the normal school district, as we slowly phase back to more of a normal situation? My question means, with some of this money we're getting, could there be a higher concentration on remote learning, and is there any particular plan within this by the board or those who are administering this to make a better approach to remote learning than we have now, with teachers trying to juggle an in-classroom reality with a remote learning responsibility?
Thank you, Alderman Smith, for your thoughts and points that you've made. And I'm so glad that we've spoken those out into the public, because there's so much to emphasize. But I will start by answering your question and then back into some of those other points, okay?
Sure.
So I understand that the State Department of Education is putting some work and research into what remote learning could look like next year. And there is chitter chatter about potential regional service centers taking on some of that work. But I don't know if that's bad rumor or not. So meaning our service center providing for an online platform regionally for those families who want to continue to engage remotely. We still don't know if remote learning will be allowed next year. So it is required this year that we give families an option. Well, we do not have that confirmed for next year. So whether that is a challenge next year or not, we're uncertain. I'm so glad that you have brought up the incredible strain this has been on our teachers. And while I have given many accolades and kudos publicly, even in this meeting, to our staff, people our staff are really getting to a very tired point. And I don't mean that in any whiny sense. It's just, none of us have walked in a teacher's shoes this year. Certainly not I. I've walked in administrator's shoes. But if you could play out the scenario where there are teachers who have different students in front of them in person day to day. You referred to a boutique model, Alderman Smith. I chuckled internally. It really has become that, where because of the flexibility, and I understand the need for that due to health reasons potentially and exposure, but teachers don't know which students will be in front of them day to day. And so their planning has to be fluid. And they're planning not just for kids in front of them, but they're also planning for an electronic platform of instruction that for so many of them was a 180 overnight learning curve, right? And now, not only do teachers have to learn how to teach online, but they have to know how to do both at the same time, in person and for remote. And there are various nuances to that that we can't even get into today. Not including the capacity of the young people in front of them to juggle all of that. And I don't mean technology. They're much better at that device than we are. But managing remote learning is something new for 8-year-olds and 18-year-olds. So there is a high level of fatigue, I will call it. So this goes way back to the first question that Mr. Vitro asked me, why aren't we back full time? Well, there are 5 factors that we've kind of danced all around. One is the health metrics. And in most people's minds, they say, well, everything's opening up. Why aren't the schools open? Right? Isn't that really the question that people are asking? But it's not that simple. Health metrics and what's happening in our state of everything opening up is only one piece of the puzzle. I have been probably to an annoying level consistent in my message that there are 5 factors, not just one. Health metrics is only one, but the social emotional well-being of our staff and students is 2. Academic priorities is 3. The availability of resources is 4, and the access, having the right number of human resources is 5. So when you take a look at those 5 factors, right now the health metrics are high, but I have enough adults to staff the building. But the social emotional needs of our staff and students are getting a little frayed. And the academic needs, well, we can't fix that in 8 weeks. And our resources, well, we have the resources because we were fiscally conservative. So Alderman Smith, you make a really great point that I am also considering the needs and of our staff as we consider a full-time schedule. I'm so sorry. We have a new member to the meeting. Sorry. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, yes, it does. And thank you, Dr. Kataya. These kind of troubling times, these unprecedented times require leadership. Sometimes it is not only attentive and focused, but also agile and creative. And I think you've brought all that to this situation. And I think Milford and the Milford Public Schools are better for it. And I thank you and all your staff and all the teachers who've done so much over this past 12 or 13 months. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman Marlowe.
Good evening, through you, Mr. Chairman, to Dr. Kataya. First, a couple comments and a question. Comments being, I wanted to, as the others have, thank you, your staff, all the teachers for the amazing job that you've done over the past year. Also, I'd like to thank you for the presentation of the budget and the format that the budget is actually presented in. I enjoy the narrative that you have after each section, as well as the questions, because to be honest, it has answered some of the questions that I was going to ask. So thank you for that presentation and the format that it's in. My question is, with the grants, the SR2, SR3, are those grants, and maybe I missed it, are those a reoccurring grant or is that a one-time grant?
One time, and they expire in September 23 and maybe 24 on one of them.
Okay, my question to follow up with that is, I saw the bullet points and some of the things that you'd like to do. Do you see that any of those initiatives that you'd like to use that money on will affect the budget in coming years? That we'll have to, what we're doing now, we have to then adjust the budget to continue those things in coming years?
That's a most definitive yes.
Okay.
That, to be absolutely honest and transparent, what we want to do is create supports that are sustainable, and that would require additional resources in the future.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for reading the budget book.
Alderman Gainer.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening. And again, to echo everybody's comments, thank you, your team, certainly the staff. I've seen my granddaughter's teacher sit on what looks like a Little Tykes, probably her children's Little Tykes chair in the very beginning of the pandemic with a dry erase board just to try to educate a kindergartner. So going above and beyond doesn't even cover, I think, what you and your staff have done. And I also, to echo Alderman Parenti's comment about your commitment with a primary focus, although it's not a budget line item, but the focus on race equality and social justice. So I appreciate that you're getting ahead of that and certainly addressing what is current affairs and topic. But my question is, earlier this year, there was a proposed budget or proposed bill that would potentially phase out school resource officers. And I wondered what your thoughts were on that specifically for the Milford system.
Thank you, Alderman Gainer, and thank you for recognizing the work on equity. I think you can't say it enough. In that vein, I think our SROs play a really important role in our schools. They've become critical to the success of our young people, the relationships they establish, and they serve a specific role, which is outlined. And that has been a successful program in Milford Public Schools, and I would like to see that continue. So my recommendation to our board will be to continue that.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that.
Alderman Tranquilli.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you to Dr. Katoya. Dr. Katoya, would you happen to know the percentage of students in the schools that are still distant learners? And if that's too much to answer tonight per school, in each school, would you happen to know roughly out of the 5,400 students that we have in the district, what the percentage is of them that are still distant learners?
I have that actually. I just pulled that number Monday. The range is 9% to 24%. The 9% is at the elementary level, the 24% is at the high school. And I think, Alderman Tranquilli, the middle is in the teens, but that's the range right now, 9 to 24. We have had, on average throughout the school year, remote learners were about 18%. We were pretty steady on that number for a good portion of the fall. And I always said my target in my head was always at 80-20 split. I'd be happy if we had 80-20. So the 9% at the elementary makes me thrilled. 24 at the high school, I just don't want that number to change, but it's going to be hard to keep high schoolers engaged in the spring, I think. I can get you the middle school number though, if you'd like.
If you can, that'd be great. Now, would you happen to know if the numbers have dropped since the beginning of the year? Or if they've have more students going back to school after or since the beginning of the year?
Well, we started the school year off with about 18% of remote learners. And that number changes depending on the season a bit. So in the winter months, I think there were some families that were a bit scared about sending their kids to school because the numbers were so high. So we had many families choose to go remote during the high positivity case rates. And then we heard from some families last week that they were voluntarily keeping their children home after spring break because they heard so many families were traveling. So the number was around an 18% average at the beginning of the year. And now it's, like I said, 9 to 24.
Yeah, I only asked because I'm one of those parents that was a little nervous about sending the boys to school. So they've been distant learning all year. And I was just curious if most parents have chose to send them back. Next year, we're going to send them back to school. The distant learning thing is just, it's really difficult. They're not getting, they're just not getting their full potential. It makes it very, very difficult. A lot of people getting vaccinated, I'll feel a little bit better next year, but
Yeah.
It's been a tough year, even for my two boys.
It's 14% at the middle school. I just ran those numbers on Monday, so I don't know if that's impacted by spring break or not, so.
Thank you.
Alderman Vitale?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Good information. It really is a difficult situation. Parents, we talk about schoolitis once in a while when kids were coming to school, follow up on it. But I think sometimes we get too comfortable being home, and there might be a lot of options or opt out of school and staying on virtual learning, which I don't agree with. But let's get back to some numbers, please. Jim, I think you would have an answer for me with this. Years ago, the Board of Education in their budgets, if they had additional funds at the end of the year, could not roll over into any accounts and into any account monies that they didn't use. Could you just elaborate on that? And then I have some follow-up questions on that. Is it true, number one? Number two, is there a max that you can put into that account? And does it have to be spent within a period of time or a period of years?
Thank you, Alderman Vitale. Through you, Mr. Chairman. The answer is traditionally, boards of education have not been able to carry over funds. But about 10 years ago, the legislature changed that to allow for, I'm sorry, scam call. The legislature changed that to allow for a 1% non-lapsing fund that could be set up so the Board of Education can request from the Board of Finance the ability to set up an account with up to 1%. And 2 years ago, that changed to 2%. So now the current law is boards of education, with the permission of the Board of Finance, can set aside 2% for a specific reason. Our board, in anticipation of the expenses that COVID was going to have from last year's budget, we requested of the Board of Finance, and they agreed to approximately a little bit over $1 million, $1,100,000 that was put into the non-lapsing fund in the city, and that is reserved for COVID-related expenses. So that's
okay. Is that like a rainy day fund that we could take in and out of?
No, I wouldn't classify it as a rainy day fund. The board's policy requires that if there be a specific reason for it.
Okay.
The policy states that capital expenditures should be the priority, but knowing what we knew last year, that we were going to have tremendous expenses related to COVID, the board wisely, whatever money was left over at the end of the year, put it into that non-lapsing fund, and it could only be spent for COVID-related expenses.
Okay. So that non-lapsing definition is that it can go on forever, kind of thing?
Correct.
Okay.
But let me qualify one more time. The legislature says it could go on forever and doesn't say that there needs to be a specific reason, but our board policy says that there needs to be a specific reason for it.
Right. Okay. The other day you sent out a expenditure summary report between January and March, and it's just been a couple of days, so I'm sure that these numbers are not going to be correct. That the percent used was over 100%, with 0.12% exceeding the 100% of the budget, last year's budget. Now, that money could not be supplemented. That funding cannot be taken out of that to zero, as Dr. Kataya indicated. So is a zero budget ending at the end of the year. But can that help in that respect and pay?
Well,
if not, where are you going to get the money?
Yeah, it could. But I will say to you that we make monthly reports to the board on how we're doing with the COVID expenses and what we anticipate for end of year and how it relates to the current operating budget. And we do anticipate that when it's all said and done, there will be a COVID-related deficit of approximately $1 million. But as Dr. Kutaya said earlier, very early in the school year, she imposed a budget freeze for all non-essential. I mean, there's some things you have to pay. You have to pay the gas bill and the electric bill and things like that. But any kind of, there was a freeze that we put on, and we've saved due to that freeze and due to natural COVID savings, like if we're not taking field trips, we don't need money for the field for the field trips for the buses. So there are some natural savings due to COVID, and due to the budget freeze, we believe that we will be able to cover the COVID deficit within our operating budget this year.
Okay, so we're still in deficit of 0.12, even more at this particular point. Just doing the math, all of the funds that the federal government have supplied to us approximately add up to about $10 million. So last year's 97,534 budget ended up to have $125 million in it. Is that correct? And if that is happening, why then would that, again, that $1 million in that account help relieve some of that?
I'm not sure that I understand the question.
Okay, the funding that we got from the government adds up to something in approximately $10 million.
Right, but that money is not part of the operating budget. And as Dr. Kutaya explained, it can't be used to supplant anything that's in the budget.
Right, but I'm sure that there's been some internal budgets and transfers within the budget because you didn't plan on the COVID and the pandemics that had to pay for a lot of these kinds of things going through the year.
Well, they did. And when that happened, that's what we used the coronavirus relief fund money for, and the ESSER 1 money for, to reimburse those costs in the budget that weren't planned for.
Okay, so as I understand it, that at the end of the year, June 31st or whatever it is, you'll be okay with that because you'll be taking money out of that other account and hopefully you'll zero out. Is that true?
We believe that we will have a balanced budget this year.
Okay.
And it mostly will be achieved through natural COVID savings and the budget freeze, things that we've put on hold rather than undertake them this year.
That's great. But going back to the Board of Finance message, it was noted that one of the members of the Board of Finance sought out a smaller increase in the budget of 2%. I believe it was 2%, which amounts to about $200,000 reduction. If that were to take place, how would that impact this year's plans to do what needs to be done in the school system? And maybe that's a question for Dr. Kutaya.
Alderman Vitale, are you asking how it'll impact this year's budget?
Well, in the Board of Finance, right, in the $99 million budget plus, when it went to the Board of Finance, one individual indicated the fact that they wanted to cut it by 2%, I believe, and that amounted to about $200,000 reduction. That would have amounted to a $200,000 reduction. Well, we're all in here in the due diligence, and we all are looking for, and the plans are extraordinary. I mean, the extraordinary work that people have done in this school system is unbelievable. As always, we've always met our goals, even when, going back years ago, we all did extraordinary work to accomplish what we did as having Milford one of the top school districts in the state. But the fact remains that if that went through with that $200,000 cut, would that be a significant cut that would really impinge on what you really plan for next year? Or can you sustain something like that? If
Well, that
worse
sounds
came
like
to
a trick
worse.
question, Alderman
I know.
Vitale.
I'm not tricking you into anything, but the fact remains.
We'll make the $200,000 cut. I mean, it's gonna, it's gonna take away from something, right?
Right.
On slide 18, I demonstrated in 6 accounts how we sliced back 1.3 million. So I'll
Okay,
just have to find another account to cut
So
another
if we,
1,000.
right, but that American Rescue Act, would that help in any way? Because you said next year, we don't know what you're gonna get. You don't know what you're gonna get next year from that, right?
We're getting ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, that's all we know.
I'm
But
sorry?
we're getting ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 in
Okay.
grant funds, but now we're starting to dabble with supplant.
Okay.
Because I planned for it in the regular budget and we're proposing to move it over to a grant. So I would have to look at specifically what cut I'm trying to make and then determine if I can classify it as a supplement and not a supplant. So without knowing what specific cut I'm making, I can't answer the question of can I move it to a grant?
Okay, so now getting back to Jim with that account we're talking about, is there a max that you can go into or the board can supplement that account?
2%. 2% is
the max, maxes out.
Max with the approval of the Board of Finance.
Okay.
Can I point one other thing out? Dr. Kataya talked about the spreading the classrooms out because of the social distancing and need to virtually clean out the entire schools and put it into trailers. I think the last count, we had 84 trailers throughout the district that are just loaded with everything that came out of the schools. At some point, we know that we're going to be moving back. And so there's nothing in this budget that would help pay for that move back. And that will be a significant cost. It'll be a significant cost in manpower, in moving expenses. The trailer rental is, just continues. So I just want the board to be aware that some of those COVID related costs we know are coming down the road, but are not in this budget. And that's probably where the non-lapsing fund money will be used for that move back into the schools.
But the move back into school, that's COVID related anyway, right? So it wouldn't some of those federal funds take care of that?
Well, you can only stretch those federal funds so far. And
But you're going to be getting, this was for this year, but you're going to be getting more next year, is that not true?
Can I chime in, please? Because you mentioned a $10 million figure a minute ago, Mr. Vitale. $10 million includes the anticipated money that we're getting that has not been committed to us yet. We don't know for sure that we're getting, Dr. Kutayev, it was 5 million, 5.8 million. We're not positive about that, and we don't have that money yet. So
I thought all those grants, the CRF was 900,000 plus, CARES was 456, ESSER 2 was 2 million plus. I thought those were already gotten by the school system.
not ESSER 2 or ESSER 3, correct?
Correct.
Right.
We're just
Not ESSER 2
applying
or
for the
ESSER
ESSER
3.
2 now, but that's due next week, as I mentioned.
Okay, yeah, I'm just wondering as if, I don't know what the intent of the board is, in doing all our due diligence. There might be some questionable kinds of things relating back to what that Board of Finance individual had indicated, so that might come up for discussion later on. But again, you did a fantastic job. You're doing a fantastic job, and money's always an issue, whether it's your side, our side, both sides. And we just have to look at it and see what we can save, because in the perception of the public, which the majority of the public do not have kids in the school system. And so the protection and to knowing where and what they're thinking from constituents, we're lacking, or we're reducing our school census a small amount, 50, I think you had indicated, was it like 50 kids this year? In past years, it was like 100 kids. We're down to 54, I think. I know we rounded up to 55, but I think it's 54 something. Within the last 14, 15 years, we've gone from a lot of kids to few kids. And it seems like fewer every year. And the question always comes up, and I can understand why, we have less kids and the budget still increases because it's costing us more. And we're the mandates, the unfunded mandates that come down from the state or from wherever it is, need to be adjusted, and we need to comply. So that's just.
Okay, Alderman Vitale. We have a few more aldermen that would like to speak, and maybe some of your questions might be answered by some of their questions. Alderman Giannatasio.
Mr. Chair, I'm finished at this particular point in time, so I don't have to be asked to stop talking. So thank you. I appreciate the time.
Alderman Giannatasio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening to the members of the board and the Board of Ed. This has been a very informative meeting. Dr. Kataya, congratulations on your award, and thank you for the wonderful presentation. It's a very detailed presentation, I must say, and I do agree with Alderman Marlowe. I particularly do. I am very impressed with the way that you presented it with the PowerPoint. It makes things a lot easier. In the past, it necessarily wasn't always done in that fashion, but it certainly answers a lot of our questions. We've been going back and forth, and there's been a lot of conversation on the polarities of COVID and things like that. I just want you to know, Dr. Kataya, that you've always said that you met with your team and the health department, and I feel that that's, the best course of action. Whether we're 3 feet apart, 6 feet apart, whether we're a full day or a half day, as long as we're doing what we need to do to get through this process, I think, that's the most important thing. I know that you have a lot of responsibility in running these schools with the faculties and the children, and then you have the parents are very involved. So I just wanted to, thank you and give you a lot of credit. And I also wanted to, also thank Jim Riccitelli. You mentioned the trailers and getting all the furniture and things moved out of the schools in a timely manner. I'm sure that was a huge undertaking. And I would like to also thank Pat Bradbury. I know that he works very closely with Mr. Riccitelli. And also wanted to thank Chris Brown. I've heard a lot about you, and it sounds like you've have really gotten comfortable in your position, and you're doing the best for our kids with special needs and directing them in the best possible scenario so they can succeed, and keeping in mind the taxpayer dollars as well that's involved in doing that. So, I understand Alderman Vitale's point. This is the time when we have to look at the purse strings of the taxpayer and the city and see where we're going and how we're moving forward as a city and also as a Board of Education. And it's been nobody's fault, Dr. Kataya. I know that you've had a plan laid out and what your change was going to be. And we got this huge COVID interruption. So we're all dealing with that, in the present. But I'm confident that things will get back to normal and we'll all be in a better place. I think that Milford, in these times have always come together as a city, as a community, to address these types of issues. And I also would like to thank Chairman Glennon for her time on the board, volunteering many, many years on the Board of Ed, and always doing the best for the children and looking out for the parents and looking out for the taxpayers. There's a lot that goes into this. It's just not as easy as everyone thinks it is. I'm just listening. I'm taking all the information in. There's been a lot of good points raised, and I'm going to take them, back with me into our caucus so we can discuss things, in more detail. But I just wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you to everyone. So with that being said, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the time.
You're
Thank you.
welcome. Alderman Willis, do you have any questions for the Board of Education?
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman Vitro. I'm actually kind of going off the beaten path a little bit here, but first I want to thank Dr. Kataya for her hard work for the last year of this pandemic. I know it's been tough, and you've done a tremendous job on that, on everything. I think my question more or less goes to Mr. Riccitelli. I see here in the budget book that it says transportation costs will rise by approximately 3%, reflecting the contractual increase with Durham Bus. I was wondering where we stand with that contract. What year are we into it? And another question I have is, have they considered electric buses at all? I know there's a town here in Connecticut that has done that, and they have one in operation. Have we considered adding some to our fleet?
Sure. Thank you, Alderman Willis. Mr. Chairman, through you. Our contractual obligation is a 3% increase. We were in the fourth of a 5-year contract, and the board voted to extend the contract by 3 years, and there was a reason for that. Durham Bus, who we have a tremendous relationship with and has served the school district extremely well, and at a very, very competitive price, as indicated by surveys that we've done throughout the state. But they lost their lease on their yard, and so they needed to lease another space somewhere in Milford, and prospective landowners were reluctant to lease any land and allow them to make any changes to it for less than a 5-year lease. And so they came to us and asked if we would consider an extension to their contract, so that they could find a piece of property, which they ultimately did. If you go by the Connecticut Post Mall, all the buses are there, but that's only temporary. They're ready to move into their new home very soon, and that's on Plains Road. And they made a considerable financial commitment to the property in improving it, putting a building up, and things like that. So in exchange for that consideration, the board did extend it. So we're now in the we have 4 more years left on the contract. And to your other point about the electric buses, yes, Durham has considered it. Durham's a national company, and so they need to keep up with the competition, and they know that electric is going to be the way of the future, as it is in automobiles too. So we don't have any electric buses now, but it certainly is on their radar screen, and they know that eventually that's what buses are going to be at some point in the future.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Alderman Hardeman, just one more. Is there anything you'd like to ask the Board of Education? Alderman Hardeman? Just one.
No, not right now, Mr. Chairman. I've had a lot of listening to a lot of questions, and a lot of it has been answered. So I'm good.
Very good. Okay, does any other members of the board have any more questions for the Board of Education? Alderman Harlan.
Thank you, Chairman. Through you to Mr. Riccitelli, just a clarification on a point that you'd made about 15 minutes ago. I did a quick back of napkin during the presentation, and between all of the funding and grants that the city's eligible for, ESSER 2, ESSER 3, CRF, CARES Act, I came up with a rough number, about $9.2 million if we're successful in all of the monies that are possibly available for the COVID relief. And you had made a comment regarding the movement of desks and the rental of containers, trailers for equipment for the schools, possibly coming out of this BOE budget to move back to the schools. First question for that is, why wouldn't that be part of the $9.2 million grants? Because it is a COVID-related expense. And second would be, are there any surpluses available this year that could possibly cover those costs?
Okay, so let me answer your second question first. Any surplus or any savings that we generate this year in this year's budget will be used to close the COVID-related deficit. And so, you know, we don't anticipate that there's going to be any money left over. It's going to cover the deficit that we have. But that's a good thing. We're covering the deficit. You know, there was concern on the part of some of the Board of Education members that at some point we'd have to go back to the city and ask for more money. And obviously that's not going to be the case. The second thing is, I wanted to point out that there was no money in this current budget to do those things, the move back in. And yes, we will use whatever resources are available to us. The non-lapsing fund dollars are there. So, you know, we may be able to use those, or we may be able to use, some monies from the ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. Although again, the major focus of ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 is education related recovery, social emotional needs of the student and things like that. So we're putting a plan together, but one way or another, we will have to cover the cost of that move back in, and it will come from the non-lapsing fund or any kind of ESSER funds that we have.
Okay. All right.
Alderman Harlot, just to reiterate, the 1.4 million of that has already been spent.
Right.
And literally, and this is more technical than you need to know, but so the application we are working on now for ESSER 2, we have to write with great specificity what each dollar is being spent on, with a needs assessment, with a SMART goal, with the number of FTEs, the number of hours these people would work, and they actually review it and approve or deny. So we can't kind of get away with, let's use this money for a trailer. Everything we plan for in the ESSER 2 and 3 is reviewed by the state and will either be approved or kicked back. So those 4 categories we have to pretty much stick to. I don't suppose there will be flexibility in those 4 categories.
Okay. Thank you for your answers.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions from any other board members for the Board of Education?
I do.
Alderman Beatty.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairperson, to the 3, Mr. Richatelli, Dr. Kataya, and Ms. Fedigan. I support the budget. I support the enterprise, the success of it, and all your efforts. I want to continue to do so. So I'd like to follow up on the question that Alderman Gaynor asked about the SROs. Mine is not a philosophical opinion. I did not know that there was legislation in Hartford in opposition to the SROs. I follow the movement from the point of view of the social and emotional needs of our kids. If the ARP money doesn't come in 23 and 24 in the form of CRF, ESSER 2 and 3, or ESSER 4 and 5, the question becomes, what are you spending it on that you could be spending the money on something else? There's $500,000 about that goes across for the SRO program. When asked the question, superintendent of school says, I like the program, I support it, and it's a success. That needs data. It needs to be evaluated. Now, I brought this up in 2019 before there was a controversy about it, or before we were talking about it as an equity issue. It was just a new program. You're spending that money. I wanted to continue to support it. I like the idea of SROs. I spoke with Chief Mello and with Dr. Kataya in private, and the only reason I'm bringing it up now is because it was brought up by Alderman Gaynor, and there was support for it, but it hasn't been evaluated. And my request is to do so. So down the line, I can continue to support it. Thanks.
If I could chime in on that. Actually, Alderman Beatty, we have an annual report given to the Board of Education that includes data on the SROs. And it's archived. So perhaps
No, I know that. It's more anecdotal and it's more from the parents' point of view, and even some of the
it actually has data.
frequency data. It doesn't have data on what is done or what is in the curriculum. It's not a formalized program of measurement of a program. At least not, you know, and it could be so, and there is funding for that. And then we could support it more rigorously if we had a sense of. I guess.
Alderman Beatty, I'll commit to following up on that and looking at.
It's not, it's meant so that if it ever becomes a controversial issue, I would be able to say, well, in our town, we did an evaluation. We found out that besides the frequency, you have frequency data, how many contacts with how many kids with that, but it doesn't say where those interchanges wind up in the records of children or how it's formalized into the guidance or support progress. That's all. It's pretty pro forma if you spend that much money on a new program that it should be evaluated, I think. So maybe it's another discussion, but it certainly is not meant as anything but move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Beatty.
For the Board of Ed. One more time, does any more Aldermen have any questions for the Board of Ed? Alderman Frank Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quick to, I don't know if it would be Dr. Kataya or maybe Superintendent Riccitelli. How much in the preparation of this budget is anticipating our educational cost sharing portion from the state? In other words, are we going from flat of what our receipts were last year in order to prepare this, or is there some expectation that we might see more or less?
No, we when we project that for the city, because the ECS monies go to the city, not to the board, but when we project that, we flatlined it from this year. So we're assuming that we'll be receiving the same amount that we did this past year.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Is there any more board members have any more questions for the Board of Education? Seeing none, I want to thank Dr. Kataya and their staff, Jim Riccitelli and Mr. Brown, everyone that attended, and Sue Glennon for answering all of our questions. And hope we can come up with a number that would satisfy everyone. It's always our goal. With that, I'll be saying goodnight to all the staff and members of the Board of Education. And I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion to recess.
Second.
We have a motion to recess and a second. Roll call vote, Madam Secretary.
Alderman Beatty,
Yes.
Alderman Gaynor,
Yes.
Alderman Genentasio,
Yes.
Alderman Hardeman. Alderman Harla,
Yes.
Alderman Marlowe,
Yes.
Alderman Parente,
Yes.
Alderman Frank Smith,
Yes.
Alderman Winthrop Smith,
Yes.
Alderman Tranquilli,
Yes.
Alderman Vitro,
Yes.
Alderman Vitale,
Yes.
Alderman Willis.
Yes.
And Alderman Hardeman, I didn't hear your vote.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. All are in favor.
Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Good night.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time.
We're in recess until Monday, April 26th at 7 o'clock. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.